Join us for this episode of Untrained, where we get to catch up with a fellow Stanford athlete and Olympic diver, Cassidy Krug. She just wrote a book on life's biggest transitions, and the book is called Resurface.
Life is full of transitions, but we don't always have the tools to handle them and navigate them. And we're going to have a conversation about just that.
Welcome to Untrained. Hey, Whitney.
Hey, Iris.
We have an awesome guest today, a fellow Stanford athlete and Olympian, Cassidy Krug. Welcome to Untrained.
Hello. Thank you for having me on. I'm so excited to talk to you guys today.
I gave a tiny intro, but we knew each other from the Stanford days. You were in the 2012 Olympic Games, and we're here to talk about your book, Resurface. Is there anything else on your long resume before we get started that you want the audience to know about you?
No, I mean, I competed in the Olympics. I have also been a brand strategist and brand and innovation strategist, and worked in advertising for many years. And now my first book is coming out, and I'm so excited. I know you guys have read the book, so you know that this has been something that's been a dream of mine since almost as long as going to the Olympics was a dream of mine. So I'm excited to share it with the world.
And your parents were diving coaches, and you went to the Olympics as a diver. So I also thought that was one of the first things that I learned in reading your book that was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, diving was my life since I was born. Like, my mom didn't really believe in maternity leave or anything. And so she took me to my first diving meet when I was a week old. I think she probably handed me off to whatever college or high school diver or parent was around when she needed her hands free. And I grew up on the pool deck. So the Olympics was like the big goal on the mountaintop for my family, for me, from as early as I can remember. Like, I remember watching the Olympics when I was 3 in 1988 and just being like, that's the dream. Like, what other dream would I have? That's the dream.
And your dream was to be an author. So here we've got the second mountaintop, right?
Yeah, I guess we did. The great thing about my parents were they were always coaches. Like, diving was very much their life, but they did not push me to make it mine. And so, they, when I was younger, actually, I hated diving. I thought it was the most boring thing. It was like, oh my gosh, don't make me sit through a diving meet. I loved gymnastics, and they supported me to pursue that as long as I for as much as I wanted and as intensely as I wanted. I loved school. I was a big nerd, particularly when it came to writing. I was the kid, writing poems in homeroom and then handing them to my teacher without her asking for them, so that I could get kudos from that too. But I always loved expressing myself in words. And I think I credit my parents to helping me develop multiple dreams at once. And I think I credit writing to actually helping me stay sort of balanced when, as you both know, Olympic training can become very intense and very consuming. I think it was really helpful and really stabilizing to have multiple dreams, or at least multiple things I felt like I was good at, kind of through the process of diving, intensifying, and then ultimately being the thing that mattered most as I was training for the Olympics.
So the Olympics are a big part of your life, but what really, I wanted to bring you on to this podcast with us because so much of this book, Resurface, resonated with both of us, with all of us, especially as an Olympic athlete. The one part, I started reading your book, and you have at the very beginning, August 5th, you said it was it August 5th, 2012, I'm standing at the top of a diving board at the biggest event of my life, basically. And the next day, that's it, right? So what happens next after that and you've kind of alluded to, your whole identity was wrapped around, even though you've done other things, was wrapped around being a diver. And so now after the Olympic Games, so I know I've kind of fast forwarded a lot of that, but, I want to spend a more of this time on your book, Resurface. It's amazing. Every chapter, I'm like, yes, and yes, and yes. So I really want the audience to know that. So how did we get to Resurface? How did we get to, I like how you call it, your first book?
Right. Yeah. So, well, fast forward a little bit. As I mentioned, diving was the dream. Diving was something from very young. It was my world. I was so comfortable on the pool deck. It was my place. And then at 27 years old, after trying for 3 times, I qualified for my first Olympic Games in London in 2012. And, if you're in a sport like diving, or I'm sure fencing or rowing are similar, like you plan in 4-year increments. Mm-hmm. You are like, where am I going to be during the next Olympics? Like, that's just kind of what guides your life. The hype for me was so high. And the Olympic experience exceeded every ounce of hype that it had. Like, I get chills thinking about it now. It was so amazing to be able to do 5 dives that I had practiced my entire life in front of billions of people. And, in diving, I'm used to like maybe hundreds of people ever watching a competition. So billions of people. And it exceeded everything. And then the next day, it was over. And, I finished that final. I had planned already to try to make the 2012 Olympic team. If I made it, great. If I didn't make it, not so great. But either way, I was going to move on with my life because I was 27. I had this sense that the world was big and the pool was small, and it was time to go experience more of it. But it was still, I was prepared. I had planned. I knew it was going to end. I knew it was going to be hard. But I don't think you can ever fully prepare for that feeling of whiplash, of all of a sudden, like the thing that guided your days, the thing that guided your habits, the thing that guided your dreams being gone. And so for me, I think because I had such supportive parents who, again, like tried to broaden my world. I had a great coach at Stanford, Rick, who made it clear that what I was learning at Stanford was as important as the diving that I did at Stanford. I had all of these forces that were telling me that the pool wasn't the only thing. And so I think for me, I fully expected that once I got through the murk of what the heck do I do next, I would figure out a career. I would throw my heart and soul into it, and it would eventually mean as much to me and fill the hole totally that diving had left in my life. And so that's what I did. I had, I definitely had about a year that I call my vagabond year of total uncertainty of where I was going. Like I went home and I tried to become a writer. I sat home in my childhood bedroom with the bubblegum pink carpet on the floor at my childhood desk and was like, all right, it's time for me to write now because I'm done diving. And I had the worst case of writer's block ever. So I couldn't quite do that. I explored a bunch of jobs. I changed cities. I moved from New York to Pittsburgh to LA to New York to, I moved all over the place. And eventually I landed in advertising. And that was where I was like, all right, now it's time to really I know I'm terrible at this now, but I'm going to put in the work ethic. I'm going to transfer all of the things that I learned from diving, and I'm going to make this my thing. And then 7 years after starting in that career, I looked up for my work. At this point, I had sort of risen a bit on the ladder, but I was working too hard. I was working 60-hour weeks, which I know some people work more, some people work less. But for me, I was putting a lot into it. And I just didn't feel like I was getting as much out as I had always expected that I would. I expected that work would eventually bring on the same full body memories as standing on the end of the diving board at the Olympic Games. And in retrospect, maybe that's crazy, but that's what I thought. And I started to wonder if I had made the wrong decision, if I had chosen the wrong thing, if I had quit at the wrong time. I was really not sure about like how I had spent my last 7 years and whether any of it had been worthwhile, because it didn't fulfill like the thing that I thought that it would. And so that led me to really want to ask these questions to other Olympians. So I ended up asking for a sabbatical from my job and then quitting so that I could free up time to go and talk to other Olympians about what their transitions on from sports had been like. Like, I wanted to know if I was alone in feeling this sort of dissatisfaction. I wanted to know if anybody else had just rolled all of their Olympic success into the next thing, and whether they could give me a pep talk and tell me what I was doing wrong. And that expanded to eventually realizing, like, A, Olympians, yes, many Olympians have struggled with these things. B, like, our struggles aren't that different from anyone that's faced really big transitions. In the process of having these Olympian conversations, I was, my dad was in the process of retiring from coaching after 30 years, and he was struggling. And my brother was fired from a job and he was struggling. And a friend of mine was in remission from cancer, but experiencing like tons of horrible side effects still, and she was struggling. And I realized that actually this story of transition is much broader than just retiring from the Olympics and moving on. And so that ended up becoming the book that I wrote, Resurface. And every chapter is grounded in an element of my story of moving on. And then that leads me to go and speak to other people who have had really vastly different transitions than I have about similar themes. And I learned so much from the people that I spoke with. I think the biggest thing is that I internalized that I was not alone in my transition, and none of us are, even though we often think we are. And I'm just so excited that this is now coming out and I'm able to share not just my story, but the stories of 20, 25 other people with the world. And just, it's this kind of ode to connection.
I mean, I feel like I have so many clients in transition. I mean, there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out their next chapter. I find there's a lot of high performers, with their hands tied behind their back, in that discomfort of not being in action. And so, I'd love for you to talk about that particularly, and how you managed it and how others manage that.
Yeah, absolutely. Piece. Yeah, I think we struggle when there are things that we can't control. And of course, there are a billion, million, gajillion things that we can't control. But when it's a big transition and it's like your life feels like it's sort of like resting in the hands of fate, that's scary. For so many people, coming through transitions, the hardest thing and the most important thing is to be okay with change happening, to trust that you are going to be ready for whatever comes up when it comes up, and to sit and wait and not be angry, because it's really just our anger, our fear, our anxiety, all of the emotions that we have wrapped up in these changes that we can't control. Those are the things that hurt you. It's not the change itself. It's just the negativity that we approach it with.
What are some things that you had to learn or unlearn as you're sitting with this discomfort? What are some things that you feel like you had to let go of, or some things that you had to add to your toolbox? Because the sitting with discomfort is actually one of the things that I think all of us say that we want to do, but not, it's kind of hard in practice. So
as a diver, I internalized that there is a perfect 10. There is a scoring system. So, I came from a world in which there's so much structure and so many systems in place. And it doesn't make life easy. It's still very difficult to try to become the best diver in the world, but the ladder was so well defined, and I had organized my life so that everything supported that. When I got into the working world, and I got into the advertising and brand strategy world in particular, I assumed that there was an equally well-defined ladder that everybody else knew about that I just was totally missing. Like, I assumed there was a perfect 10 of an ad campaign. I assumed that, my bosses were like judging me in the same way that my coach was, but they weren't actually explicitly saying exactly what I needed to do right or wrong. Like, I can remember even just sending an email, like trying to sit there for hours to craft the perfect email because I thought there was some definition of perfect that didn't exist. And I think for me, like, one of the biggest things that helped was just realizing, like, getting outside of myself, getting outside of my shame around not knowing what was going on, and like talking to people and realizing that that wasn't the way that the world worked here. And sometimes lean into your vulnerability, like ask the questions that you're afraid to ask for help when you're afraid to ask for help. Forcing myself also to put myself out there a little more than I otherwise would have, and realize that like it wasn't the end of the world if I made a mistake or if I got something wrong. The idea of learning through doing is hard for a lot of people, and was particularly hard for me, who spent so many hours practicing for the big event. And I think in real life, you just have to get more comfortable with the big event being the thing that you practice and the thing that you learn, like as you're living.
Yeah. I love how you talk about internalizing. You basically internalize the rules of diving. And I think that's something for all of us to be curious about when we're in a transition. What are the rules I've internalized that I think life should be operating by, or how things should work, and really getting curious about that. And the other thing I've been thinking about since the last question was, you talked about acceptance, acceptance of the new situation. But a lot of us have a hard time getting out of the grief, the anger, the sadness. Like, we can't just decide. That's not like that's where we need to go. So I think it just comes back to, I think transitions are not an individual sport. We need to bring folks in to help us either with the emotional component or the tactical component or all of the above, because chances are we'll struggle with one part of it, and we'll have some strengths shored up for other parts of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think you said it really well with transitions are not an individual sport. And especially for people who are perfectionists, like, you want to be able to fix the problems internally. One thing that I learned through the course of this that I don't think I had ever really internalized before is how, two sides of the same coin, how willing people are to help you if you know what you want and know how to ask. And also how good it feels to help other people. And I had, there's one person I spoke to, this woman named Becca, who she was an expert skydiver. She had 7,000 jumps under her belt. Ooh. She was training to teach the teachers. So she was like a badass woman in a male-dominated field. She was so awesome at it. And then she had an accident. And she was quadriplegic, so she was paralyzed from the neck down. And she's so cool. Like, it begs the question of, like, you're like, what would I do if something like that had happened to me? And the way that she's approaches her life now, like, it doesn't stop her. Her Instagram is amazing. It's like her, going down a mountain on an adaptive sled, and it's her, like, having shots in the parking lot of a Luke Bryan concert. And it's her doing stand-up comedy while her brother holds the mic in front of her face. Like, it hasn't stopped her at all. And when we were talking, it became so clear that the most important thing to her, and the thing that she's worked the hardest to maintain, and the thing that I think has helped her to cope with everything that you have to cope with when you have such a catastrophic injury, is community. And she, like, one thing that she started doing after her accident was hosting Tater Tuesdays. Tater Tuesdays. If you can only imagine, what the logistics it takes to leave the house when you're paralyzed from the neck down, make it difficult. And so she recognized, she was like, I'm going to become isolated unless I bring the world in. And so she started hosting Tater Tuesdays, which is somebody puts a bunch of potatoes in the oven, somebody sets out all the fixins. It's for 3 hours on a Tuesday. Her friends come, they bring their friends. It's this like sort of rolling community gathering, a new set of people every week. And it enables the outside world to come into her or to come into her world. And she was like, if I had let myself become isolated, I would not have been okay. And this is one of the things that's enabled me to thrive. Another thing I learned from her is in a situation in which she has to accept help in nearly everything she does, like her parents have to dab her eyes when there are tears in them. Like she goes on Tinder dates and the guy pours beer into her mouth. Like her friends have to suction her lungs. Like she has to accept help in every part of her life. And so the thing that she seeks and desires and works for more than anything else is to give help to others. So, she's talking about how she's like, so excited that she finally got her parents to go to therapy. And that was her way of helping them. Like she started balancing the family calendar, which is a burden off of her dad. And so what came through super clearly from Becca's story was just how much we're hardwired to give and receive help, and how that is a lifeline and can be a lifeline through like the most intense of transitions.
We've talked about in transition, the part about sitting with discomfort. We've talked about this other piece of building community and vulnerability, I would say, of allowing help. I wanted to actually talk about one of the chapters. Each one of your chapters kind of covers these topic areas of transition. I wanted to talk about the role of grief because, Whitney, you said it too. I think there is a bit of that, and I think we can kind of steamroll through it. I know for me, myself, after the Olympics, I didn't give myself time for any of that. I just was like, okay, well, moving on, next thing. If I just keep moving, then it'll be okay. And it's interesting because one of the things I think I see the most of when I'm helping other Olympians and Paralympians through their journey to, I call it normie life, there is a moment where I have to pause us to really think about the loss that they feel because they're unwilling to articulate it. And I kind of just sit there with them and we can create a space where they can articulate, like, what do I feel like I'm losing? And not steamrolling through the next action. Because that's the one thing I see a lot of from them is like, they're like, I want to, help me get the job, like help me get to the next thing. And I'm like, whoa. We need to take a second. And maybe it's not grief, but it's sitting with the feeling, right? Sitting with what they feel like. But I love, you did write a chapter on grief, so I'd like you to expand on that for the listeners.
Absolutely. And I was like the people that you work with. I expected to leave diving behind, put all my energy and all my thought forward and figure out the next thing. And I did not think that it was worth it to dwell on what I had left. And one thing that I learned through the course of writing this book actually is, like, I had kind of thought of grief as reserved for death. Like, only, grief is something like when you have an extreme loss, like grief isn't something that should come up for a choice you've made purposefully yourself, right? And what I learned is that no, like, grief is a very natural response to a big loss of any sort. It doesn't matter if, like me, you chose that loss. Like I chose to retire from diving. Like still, I can grieve it. And so I think just recognizing that I was allowed to feel those feelings and that I didn't have to push them away and I didn't have to be angry at myself for feeling them was a really big transition for me. One thing that I expected about grief, but that I was wrong about, was that it should fade over time. But I think it sort of grew. as my life got further and further away from diving, and diving in a way, moved on without me. Like new people came up, new people got good. Like I watched diving move on without me and I moved on without it. And I think as that distance grew further, I kind of felt in ways that grief grows stronger, and I didn't understand how to articulate that. And I think I realized that grief is just a much more expansive and shared and like natural part of transition than I ever would have expected.
One of the things that I want to pivot to, and it came up in your book, and it came up, and it's something that that's really helped me in my own life, is the idea of intentional ritual. And whether that's a ritual that we do, weekly, or a one-time ritual that we do for the end of something. But could you talk about the role of ritual in transition and how it can support us and how that's impacted your own life?
Yeah. Well, I think of ritual, basically our lives kind of tend to blend together in some ways. Like 1 minute leads into another, one big milestone sort of leads into another. And if we don't stop to recognize those things and be intentional about, thinking through them, thinking like, mourning what we've lost, like setting intentions for the future, then I think we do ourselves a big disservice. It becomes very hard to change intentionally and to become who we want to become. And so I think that in my mind, a ritual is a way to put a punctuation on like the run-on sentence of life. I just said that it was in my mind. That was something a friend of mine said.
Well, I'm going to add in, I think one of the things that occurred to me when transitioning out of sport is that sport is so full of rituals. Like, even if it's like changing out of your street clothes into your sport clothes, or like for us carrying the boat down and the oars down, like or stretching, like there's all these unique rituals that we don't think about, but that are soothing, and that there's so few rituals built into particularly a work from home on a computer type of life. So I think we lose a lot of rituals, and ritual can help us in our transition.
Yeah. I think that's super true. And I think rituals are amazing because it's, as you were saying, like it can be a thing you do every day. It can be like a giant milestone, like a wedding or a funeral. Yeah. And I think we don't have nearly enough of either of those kinds of things in our modern life. Yeah. I think about all of the rituals that sport included, both the institutional ones of, we line up in wave before we go to start the competition, even the dive is announced, the judge blows the whistle, it's time to go. Every part of sport is ritualized. Yeah. I think the first big realization that something is different is that for the most part, the end of a sports career, there's no good rituals for that.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, one sport, wrestling, has an amazing ritual for the end of the sports career. But diving sure didn't. Like in wrestling, there's a shoes on the mat tradition. And you know what your last match is going to be, when you're going to retire. And at the very end of that match, while the announcer is sort of announcing your accomplishments, you sit right in the middle, you take your shoes off, and you leave them on the mat when you walk away. Ooh. I know, I'm like crying talking about it now. But it's such a amazing, kind of breathtaking symbol that you've left everything that you could, you've given everything you could to your sport, and it's time to move on. And I think that it would be amazing if we could develop rituals for all sports and all athletes, because I don't think it's recognized how difficult and how much magnitude that retirement moment has. Like whether you went to the Olympics, whether you stop in high school, the sport has such a important impact on your life and on who you become. And I think recognizing that power is really important in how we move on, and also in how we can look back and remember that thing and its role in our lives.
You don't always get to choose when you retire too. So
Right.
I think it's also good to have that moment. So I think the rituals, what it does is let you pause and really reflect. You kind of do that in the book. You ask people to pause and reflect on certain things. But yeah, in sport, it's sometimes injuries. I just worked with a Paralympian. He wasn't sure if he was going to retire, and he could have kept going, but decided not to. And it's the same in Whitney. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the corporate world and tying or connecting a dot here, because people are being laid off right now. People are transitioning and don't want to, or they do want to. Is there anything that you do with your clients that you've put into sort of like this corporate ritual for them to help them as they move through their transition?
Well, I have a client now, and where she's planning on a next chapter, and so we're going to create one for her. So we're going to co-create a ritual to really mark that together. And I'm thinking about that more and more with my clients. But I would also say for folks who, I hear about a lot of people who have to let people go, and in terms of a ceremony, it's just, pardon my language, shittiest ceremony I've ever, like it lacks, they're often inhumane. They lack anything sacred, or meaningful, right? It's just about getting people out the door as quickly as possible, liability, all that stuff. But if that happens to someone, you can do a redo, right? Like you can pull people together and do your own ritual of some sort to mark a transition. So I just encourage, the thing about rituals is like, they're just creative endeavors. We get to make them. They don't need to be Christmas or like religious holidays or the holidays that we know. They can just be something that we make up and invite people into. So, I just encourage people to get creative and think about it. And I'm doing more of it with my clients because I think they're powerful.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think it goes back to, Iris, your point that athletes don't always know when they're going to retire, but it doesn't have to be a ritual on the day of your final competition. No. It can be months later. Yeah. And I think what matters is that there's maybe opportunity for reflection. Like it gives you a chance to reflect on your accomplishments, reflect on what you've learned, celebrate the thing that mattered to you. I think often it's important that they're communal. Mm-hmm. And so Whitney, as you were saying, getting people together, getting people to witness and recognize this milestone with you. And I think sometimes it's nice to really be intentional about what values you want to both recognize from what you're leaving behind and take with you into the future, and figure out how you can sort of embody those values within it. But it doesn't even have to be I have somebody I interviewed in the book. She went through menopause and she had a goodbye Aunt Flo party, and that was her ritual. Yeah. And she had little tampons that she tied with string, and those were her party favors.
Oh my God, I want to meet this person.
Yeah, and she's amazing. And everybody drank Bloody Marys, and everybody sat around and told the stories of their first periods. And it was just this, for her, it was a chance to bring so many taboo topics out into the open, and for people to come together and support one another. Mm-hmm. And for anyone that was at that party to also recognize that going through this shift in life didn't have to be this dark, negative loss, but it could be something that they could relate and build community over. So ritual doesn't have to be a funeral. It can be a party too.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I'm thinking of a simple one that I've done with my kids, which is you take a candle and you light it. And then, that represents the thing that's ending, and you talk about it and what it meant to you. And then you have a new candle and you light the new candle with the old candle, right? And you say what that means to you. And it could, the transition out of whatever it is, could be the new school year. And then you blow out the old candle. So that's a super simple one that people can play with as a starting point.
Yeah, I love that. And it's amazing because the act of doing the candle thing it's like putting a bookmark in a book. Like it marks a moment, it makes a memory, and it just changes how you feel about like leaving one thing and entering another.
Yeah.
So we could cover a lot in transition. There's a lot of topics. You have a whole ass book on it. So
Beautiful. Do you have it in your house? Because you gave us a digital copy. Do you want to hold it up?
Oh my gosh. So this is my only copy so far. I've gotten exactly one from my publisher. This is my book.
Oh, it's
so
beautiful.
the cover has the bubbles. It's called Resurface.
Yeah.
So they can get copies or pre-order copies, I think, on Amazon. Is that right?
That's true. You can pre-order copies. I think if you were to Google my name and Resurface, you would find the pre-order page pretty quickly. And it's out on June 10th. So after that, hopefully you should be able to also find copies in your local bookstore.
So what's one thing you want the audience to take away from today's discussion? And we usually go around the horn. How about you, Cassidy? You go first. What's one thing you hope the listeners of Untrained hear from you today?
Biggest thing is, no matter what type of transition you're facing, whether you are stuck in a job trying to figure out whether to quit it or not, whether you've just gotten a scary diagnosis, whether you're moving on from a sport, whether you're moving on from an addiction, or any transition you are facing, you are not alone, and you have the people around you have experienced way more than I think we think that they have. And open up to people, find people you trust, tell them your story and ask them theirs. Go online, find support groups for what you're facing, like talk about it, because we don't talk about this stuff nearly enough. And it's not just you unloading your fears and anxieties on other people. It is you like enabling and empowering them to do the same and showing them in ways that you probably won't even know that they're not alone either.
How about you, Whitney?
Well, it's just reminding me of someone was talking about, there was a presentation where someone said, okay, go through and write down everything that's happened in your life, the good stuff and the bad stuff. And the bad stuff, it turns out that's the stuff that usually shapes us more into who we are, right? And we learn and we grow from. And I think the transitions are an inherent part, like they're inherent growth arenas, right? They're invitations for growth. But we need to be set up. We need to be resourced within them. So I'm going to just echo what Cassidy said about we got to invite people in. We've got to learn from others, share. They're an opportunity for connection and growth if we allow them to be. And they're hard. Like give yourself a lot of credit. They require courage and grit, and they're not easy. So whatever transition you're going through, we are cheering you on.
I always try to make myself available to any Olympian or Paralympian moving in transition out of sport into the normie life. And I just offer being there for them because I felt like that was what I needed as well. It did take me time to be vulnerable and to open up, but I offer that out into the universe to others. All right. Thank you so much for being on the Untrained podcast.
Awesome. Thank you.
I hope the listeners learned a lot about transitions. Maybe you resonated with some of the things that we said. And Whitney, what do we say at the end of every podcast?
Keep on training.
Keep on training. And if you like what you hear, we ask that you join our Untrained tribe on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube.
And now the final thoughts with Iris and Whitney.
Whitney, we've got to talk about Cassidy Krug on transitions. It was amazing. The conversation was amazing.
I could have continued that conversation for a very long time. And I think one of the reasons is because transitions are something that we all have, but we don't always talk about them. I mean, as Cassidy said, she sort of assumed she thought of grief as something that you did when somebody died, and not grief is something that accompanies transitions, good and bad, or difficult and life-giving, right? You can have a baby and that's and it all goes well, but you still have to grieve the life that you're leaving, right? And we don't always allow room for that. Or as Cassidy is, the transition that prompted this is leaving her sport of diving at the age of 27. And even though it was a choice, something she wanted to do, it was so full of grief and challenge.
I wanted to take a deeper dive with you on...
No pun intended!
Hey. I wanted to take a deeper dive into talking a little bit about sitting with discomfort, because that part, I haven't felt satisfied about kind of how I loved what we talked about, but I wonder if this sitting with discomfort is difficult to talk about because it's so different for every person. We could definitely give tools, but why do you think this sitting with discomfort is, gosh, it's a topic we talk about at, where I work, but I don't find the conversations satisfying for some reason.
Well, you mean when we sort of talk about, well, you just need to become more comfortable with your discomfort, or you just need to accept the reality, or you just need to trust the process. You don't know why that doesn't work. You don't know why we can't flick a switch. I mean, I feel like the last 3 client calls I had were a theme was sitting with discomfort, and as you named, that discomfort will be universal and unique. Right? There's something universally challenging about people who are very action-oriented having to wait weeks and months for things to click into place, or new people to be announced, or the new plan to be announced, or whatever. But the parts inside us that have a hard time with that may be unique to us. So we've been talking about this. I use a internal family systems lens, which is that we have different parts inside of us. So in any transition, we might have I have to be in action. And if I'm not in action, don't feel safe, right? Or that's part of being in action is how I feel valuable, how I feel, it's like part of my identity. So for that person, it's really getting to know, well, what role has that part played in your life? What does it feel like when it can't be in action, when it can't move forward? So it's a lot of exploration and curiosity and getting to know ourselves a little bit better, and giving somebody some tools for when those really big, strong feelings come up, or at least some different perspectives. So you understand this really well, even those really, anxious, hardworking driver parts and how they feel when they lose their job, right? So what do you want to say about that?
I think as always, you always have the best way of putting it simply and for people to understand. I think you're right. It's sitting with discomfort is universal, but the tools you need are going to be unique, right? So the tools I use to sit with discomfort may not be the same as something that you use. And oh my gosh, you hit the nail on the head. I think we adjust ourselves to death, right? It's like, if you just accept it, it'll be fine. So
you should be able to accept it. And then we should ourselves, right? Like, what's wrong with me that I can't just move on? Nothing. You can't move on yet. Let's be curious about why.
I think you're absolutely right about that. It's taking the time, which is really hard. For me, when I start with the self-awareness, I'll use myself as an N of 1. A lot of times it takes me a long time to even realize I'm in transition or sitting with discomfort.
That's true.
You laugh because you know. You laugh because you know.
Maybe, Iris, you're feeling this way because...
And I'm like... No. And then I'll call you later and be like, yes. So I think that's the one thing I kind of wanted to take a deeper dive on was to really talk about the sitting with discomfort, because everyone says that. They're like, you got to sit with discomfort because that is the growth space. I'm like, oh, good for you. Great. Thanks. But how do you do that? Sorry. So I'm glad we took a little bit of a step into that, because I wanted to make sure listeners really understood that it's much harder than just, right? So just accepting or just this or just that and taking the time. I think that's the theme, right? Is more of this, take the time to see what you need and what support you need.
Yeah. So I would say if you're doing any like I should be able to get over this sooner or I should or blah, 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 like let's ask that to move to the side and instead just be curious. Like what is hard about this for me? Because that's valid and treating whatever you're feeling is valid. And then where can I get some support so I'm not alone with this? Because if I'm having trouble moving through it by myself, then okay, maybe a better strategy is to get some support, either with friends, loved ones, maybe some professional support, and to resource yourself in it. Because if it's, chances are you may be up against some territory that is new for you, either internally or externally. And so you're going to need to bring in reinforcements. It's not something you can do alone.
And it's messy because you're...
Oh, messy. Because there's no map. You've got to make the map. It's your transition and there's no existing map. And that stinks.
It stinks. I like to be told that there's an endpoint, but also you're kind of holding a duality. So the last thing I'd say about that is you are in a transition point. And once Iris recognizes she's in a transition point, you're also living your life at the same time as shifting. So that's also messy too. So, you know, you could be working, but also feeling all these things. So you need to be able to, for me, it's taking the time, one, to recognize that I'm in transition. Two is, yes, I'm living my life, but do I have any time carved out so that I can also reflect on the points of that I'm feeling around the transition that is happening right now. And there is no endpoint. There's like, I mean, I guess there's...
You feel it. You feel it. You know, you can feel when your own transition arc has changed. I mean, maybe there's like your new job starts, right? And there's a concrete thing, but it's also an ongoing evolving shift inside. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you're so good at like articulating
I'm taking all these compliments, Iris.
Oh, you're so good at articulating it.
Well, the one thing I'm not good at today is having my shirt and my wallpaper match. There's
so if you're on YouTube,
clashing. You got to come to YouTube to see it and to see me row crew.
Well, I just wanted to have this little deeper dive after the conversation. We're going to try to do some of this post podcast so that the two of us can reflect on the conversation.
Yeah, because I miss talking to just you.
I think so. We miss talking to each other, so you're going to have to be subject to that as an audience. And also, you know, we both have so much experience in this field, right, of coaching, of life, and so offering some of the deeper things and explaining why we have someone or a guest on and why they were part of Untrained is going to be part of this extra bonus part of the podcast. So we hope you enjoy that as well. And Whitney, we have a podcast coming up, and just maybe you can tease it here around something we talk about a lot that you're really interested in.
Yeah, so internal family systems is a model that informs the book I wrote, Body Image Inside Out. It informs my practice, and it's informed my own healing, evolution, growth, greater freedom. And so I want to bring in my teachers and coaches to help my clients with whom I use internal family systems better understand the model, better understand what's happening when I say, so can we talk to that part? What is going on? How does the part fit into the broader scheme of things? And so I'm thrilled to bring my teachers in to share, to illuminate the internal family systems model for my clients.
Well, you're just going to have to keep listening. And again, if you like what you hear, make sure you join the tribe. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or YouTube.